Hey, this is Ryan with Goodwin Racing, and this is our wheel fitment guide for the third generation MX5, also known as the NC chassis, 2006 to 2015. Now, before we get into all the different wheel and tire sizes and what fits the car, there's an important thing to keep in mind. I cannot cover everything related to every different size and what fits what in one video. I mean, it would be an hour long. Go to goodwinracing.com. We have all of the specs for every single wheel, the brake clearance, the weights, offsets, everything on the website for each product. Also, on the product page for each of the wheel listings, you're going to see pictures of that wheel in that color, etc., on other cars. We catalog all of the pictures of our own project cars that we've tried different wheels on, as well as all the pictures that customers have sent in to us of their cars. And so you can get an idea of what it looks like on different color cars and all of that stuff. Now, there's a couple of things to cover just so that we're on the same page as I talk about all these different fitment notes. I could make a video about every single one of these things. I probably should at some point, but I'll try to just hit the high points so that we're talking about the same thing. The first thing is offset. Now, offset is commonly misunderstood. Offset is talking about where the mounting surface on the back side of the wheel that mounts to the car, where that is in relation to the center line of the wheel. A lot of people think that it's a measurement from the front or from the back side of the wheel, and it's not. It's a measurement off the center line. Now, you're going to see a lot of different, out there in the world of wheels, you're going to see a lot of different measurements. You're going to see positive numbers, 50, 60 millimeters, all the way moving down closer to 0. And the bigger numbers are going to be, bigger positive numbers are going to be out here closer to the face of the wheel, is where the wheel mounts, which in turn means that the wheel actually mounts closer to the center line of the car. It's sucked in more. And then as that offset number gets smaller or closer to 0, you're moving this direction with the mounting surface until you hit center line. That's 0. A 0 offset means that that mounting surface is exactly in line with the center of the wheel, and then you start to move into the negatives. Now, for NCs, we're never going to be talking about 0 offset or negative offset because those just aren't going to fit the car at all. But just keep in mind, though, it does not tell you where the outer face of the wheel is. Okay, number 2, fender rolling. Now, again, I can make an entire video about fender rolling, but the important thing to keep in mind is that there's a lot of people who are afraid of fender rolling. I think that most of that is based on just a lack of understanding of what fender rolling actually is. And there's a lot of people who misinterpret fender rolling as thinking that we're talking about fender flares. Not the same thing. Fender flares are a whole different animal. Now, you may or may not want to do fender rolling on your car, but at least do a little bit of Googling. Look on YouTube. There's a lot of good videos that show what fender rolling is, and also have a lot of how-tos, because you can have a shop do it for you. Most tire or wheel shops can either do it for you or recommend someone that can do it for you, a different shop. Or there's tutorials on how to do it in your own garage. And there's special tools for it, and then there's all the way down to, the ghetto version that I did on my car, which you use a baseball bat. The bottom line is, it's not a thing to be afraid of, and oh, I don't want to do that, I don't know what's going on with that. The lip of the fender here, if you've got the fender here, you've got a lip that curls underneath, and then generally the factory fender has got a lip that sort of sticks inwards here. That lip is the first thing that the tire is going to hit if you have a combo that's starting to get wider than stock and all of that. Fender rolling, the only thing you're doing is you're using a tool to roll that inner fender up and away from the tire so that you get more clearance. That's all you're doing. When you look at the fender from the outside of the car, when it's properly done, you can't tell anything happened. The car looks completely stock, you don't even know. So maybe you've got a pristine NC with 5 miles on it and you just don't want to roll the fenders. Awesome, I get that. But my point is, especially the autocrossers and the racers who really want to get all the rubber on the car that they can, don't need to shy away from fender rolling. Google it, look it up, wrap your head around it, and then decide whether it's something for you or not. Now, the third thing that we need to cover is, what do we mean when we say that a wheel clears the car or clears the fender? It's important to keep in mind, at Goodwin Racing, we like to use the cars for what they're intended for, which is driving them. And that can mean cruising around on the street, cruising through the canyons. That also means racing them at the racetrack. Regardless of which type of use we're talking about going through the corners, compressing that suspension, all of that stuff. There's a lot of facets of car culture out there, and there's some versions of things where people are focused on making the car look good when it's sitting still, and you'll hear references to stance and how much the wheel is poking out, and they may say that a wheel fits. You know, people who are doing that kind of fitment stuff, they might say, oh yeah, this wheel fits, and you're looking at the specs and going, that's a -10 offset. There's no way that is fitting. What are you talking about? And then you see them pull out of the parking lot and they hit a pebble and the suspension compresses 1 millimeter and they rub all the fenders. That's not fitting to us. Fitting sitting still is not enough. We talk about, when we say that something fits, we're talking about no matter what you're throwing at it. You can be jumping curbs at the racetrack. As that suspension goes through its range of motion and that wheel tucks up into the fender, it is either gonna rub or it's not gonna rub. And so that's what we're talking about. It's either a combo that's not gonna rub, you're gonna be good to go, or we're gonna say, yeah, you need a fender roll or you need this much negative camber or whatever it is so that it doesn't rub. That's what we're talking about. Now, all of the wheels that we're talking about can take Hubcentric rings. I have done a whole separate video on Hubcentric rings and whether you need them or not. The short answer is maybe. So go watch that video if you're not sure if you need Hubcentric rings. If you're a street guy, you probably should do it. And we have all these specs for the what size Hubcentric ring each wheel takes on our website. Again, go to goodwinracing.com. A final note is about tire size. And we're going to talk a bunch of different widths, but there's one thing that you really can't go past, and that's a certain diameter of the tire. When you go too large on the tire, then when the suspension compresses, it's going to run into the top of the fender. And so generally speaking, for an NC, 24.5 inches is kind of the sweet spot for tire diameter. You can go up to 25, like the 225/45/17 is a popular tire size to do on like a 17x8. That's going to work, 25-inch outer diameter for that, but you don't want to go much bigger than that. Now you can go smaller than 24.5. That's not going to have any additional clearance issues because it's actually going to take up less space. Now the first thing we're going to cover is the question that we get the most often, and that is, what is the maximum wheel and tire size I can fit on my NC without fender rolling? And we're going to set aside my personal feelings about stop being afraid of fender rolling for a second. And the answer to that is that you can do a 17x9 with a 235/40/17 tire, but the offset is critical. The offset needs to be 48 millimeters or higher. Now you're going to notice when you start looking on our website at all the different wheels, there aren't really a whole lot of wheels like that, or with those specs. The Enkei PF01 is going to be the one that comes in that sort of measurement. Now this is a narrower PF01, but this wheel in a 17x9 comes in a 48 millimeter offset, also comes in a 50 millimeter offset. That's the wheel that's going to make that possible for you if you're really trying to get a 17x9 under there and you just aren't willing to do a fender roll. It's an awesome wheel. Enkei makes beautiful, super strong, lightweight wheels. It's a great choice, but just understand that a lot of 17x9s that you see on the site aren't going to be an option. 45 millimeter offset is a lot more common, but that's getting super tight. You could probably pull off a 235 if we're talking about some sort of all-season tire that runs fairly narrow for the measurement that it says it is, and you've got a lot of negative camber, something like 2 degrees negative camber at least. Yeah, you could probably squeeze it in there, but the whole point of 17x9 is to get a lot of tire on the ground. And you're sort of fighting yourself on that if you don't want a fender roll. 17x8 is going to be your much easier option. So if you just don't want a fender roll, consider the 17x8s. Now let's talk about the narrower end of the spectrum for wheels, and then we'll move all the way through up to the wider stuff. Your first size is going to be 17x7. Now this is the same width as your factory wheels. The factory NC wheel sizes are either 16x7 or 17x7 depending on the package. that came on the car. And so you're not going any wider, but you're maybe trying to find something that just looks a little bit better or is also a little bit lighter. Now, there's not a lot of choices in this size because most people are taking the opportunity when they buy aftermarket wheels to go wider as well because they want to increase the performance that way. But the options that you do have are Enkei PF01, and this comes in a 17x7, and there's also an Enkei PF05. However, the PF01 is lighter, so that would be my choice between the two. Also, if you're autocrossing in C Street class, where you're not allowed to go wider, then that PF01 is a great choice for you. It's within the 7mm offset of the factory wheel, which makes it legal for C Street, and it's a great option if you need an alternate set of wheels instead of your factory wheels. Now the next size up is only a 1/2 inch different. It's a 17x7.5. And there's not a lot of wheel options in this size either, but there are a couple of good options. The Enkei PF01 that I just showed you, that's also available in a 17x7.5. And then the Enkei RPF1 is also available in 17x7.5. Now, an important note about the RPF1 is that no matter what size wheel you're looking at, whether it's 17x9, 17x7.5, or anything in between, the RPF1 is always going to be the lightest wheel in that category. So if you're looking for the lightest wheel, it may not be the cheapest wheel, but it's a super high quality, super strong, super lightweight wheel. Its tire size, you're looking at usually a 205 or a 215 is an easy fit on that. And both of those wheels in 7.5 are going to be a piece of cake to put on the car. You're not going to have to do anything to the car for that. Now we get into 17x8, and this is where your options really kind of explode. There are going to be Enkeis. You're also going to notice a bunch of options from Koenig and Avanti Racing. Offsets are going to be somewhere from 45 down to 40mm. Those are all going to be piece of cake to fit on the car with no fender roll. And then as you go under 40mm, you'll see a couple options that are 38 or 35mm. In 17x8, with those offsets, you are going to need a fender roll. Tire size is going to be something like a 215, 225, or 235. Now, a 235 does fit on a 17x8, but the tread width is actually wider than the wheel. And so that works nicely on a street car because that actually means you've got a little bit softer sidewall and it aids ride quality. On the track, we wouldn't do a 235 on a 17x8. We would put the 235 on a 17x9. What that does is it stretches the sidewall out a little bit, makes the tire a lot more responsive, and actually it makes it faster according to the stopwatch as well. But 17x8 is an awesome choice. There's a ton of 40 and 45mm wheel choices, offset wheel choices, that are going to be a piece of cake to put on the car. You've got Ultraforms, Decagrams, the Hypergram, both of these are Hypergrams. This is the Ampliform, the Avanti Storm S1. There's a ton of wheel options in 17x8. Moving up from 17x8, we get to 17x9s. We kind of already touched on this when we were talking about that 17x9 plus 48 or higher being able to actually fit the car without having to do a fender roll at all. But you're going to notice that most of the wheels are going to be a 40 or a 45mm offset in 17x9. Now, as I said, a 45 offset, you could probably squeeze a narrow tire on there. If you've got enough negative camber, yeah, you could squeeze it by that fender without having to roll the fenders. But the whole point of a big 17x9 wheel on that car is you're trying to get a big footprint on the ground. You're trying to get a lot of rubber on the ground. So do the fender roll, and then you can do a 235, which is a great fit, or a 245, which is a really good fit on a 17x9 as well. Some guys are even doing 255s, and you can fit the 255 as long as what we're doing with the fender roll is something that we call a flat roll. And that just means that instead of just curling the lip inside the fender up a little bit, we're curling it all the way up and making sure it's really pushed up against the inside of the fender so that you've just got the maximum amount of space. But you can fit a 255 on a 17x9. Now, when we're talking about 17x9s, it is assumed that you are doing performance driving. People aren't putting 17x9s on a car that came with 17x7s if they just want to drive the car to the grocery store. So it is therefore also assumed that you've got some amount of negative camber. If you're driving around and you've never had the car performance aligned and you just take it to the alignment shop and you say, give me an alignment, and they put it somewhere in the green, you really don't know what your alignment is. You want to have a bit of negative camber. Now, you don't have to get crazy, but -1.5 degrees, that's perfectly mild for street use, but it's going to perform well. Closer to -2 degrees, nothing wrong with that. That's going to work great on the street. And we're assuming when we're talking about fitment for something like a 17x9 that you're going to have that kind of negative camber at least. Now that takes us to 17x10s. And this is a race fitment. This is something that you're going to be putting on a car that is going for lap times at autocross, track day, that sort of thing. There are two options. There is an RPF 1 in 17x10, but that comes in a 38mm offset. And there's really no way to fit the 38mm offset 17x10 under a factory fender, no matter how much fender rolling that you do. This is going to take a fender flare. And especially because the whole point of doing something like a 17x10 is to put a nice big beefy tire on this thing and not, try to stretch some narrow little tire on this just so you can fit it under the car. This is going to be, so a 17x10 version of the RPF 1 here is going to be something that you need a fender flare for. Now the Koenig Hypergram 17x10 is a newer edition. This is a 43mm offset, and that 5mm difference in offset makes all the difference in terms of being able to fit it under the NC. Now I've done a separate video on this. We did a whole walk around of our Turbo NC after we got back from Circuit of the Americas. These wheels were mounted on it. We had some super fat 255 Yokohamas on there, and I talked about this wheel in a lot more detail. You can go and watch that video if you want to see details on this wheel. Just important to keep in mind that this is a race fitment wheel. If you're, street car and you're convinced that you need to have a 10-inch wide wheel on there, all right, cool, I dig it. But understand that a race fitment wheel comes with the understanding that you are going to have a bunch of negative camber, because that's what you'd have on a race car, and you're going to have really rolled fenders because that's what you're going to do on a race car, and it's going to take some work, and it may still rub the plastic liner and eat through the plastic liner in places and things like that, because that's all normal stuff for a race car. So if you want to put on your street car, okay, cool. Just understand that it comes with some work and some compromises. 17x9 is more what I would consider your aggressive street high grip setup over the 17x10. This has got an awesome place in the world for NCs on racetracks across the globe, but for street cars, 17x9 is a little bit more appropriate. It's an easier fit. It's probably going to make a lot of the street guys a little bit happier because they're not going to hear things rubbing under there. This is just a couple of the wheels that we've got. We have hundreds of wheels on the website, different colors of each of these. There's too many for me to list. This video is probably too long and everybody's checked out already anyways. Go to the website, goodwinracing.com. We have a contact us page on our website. That's where you can reach out to us by email or by phone, and we can get in touch. We can talk about your car, because here I'm talking about everything for every single NC, and it's hard to cover everything. But if we're just talking about your car and what you're doing with it and what tire you want to run and your specifics, we can pinpoint the right thing for you pretty darn fast, and that's what we're here for. So shoot us an email, call us, we'll be here for you. Have fun searching around for some awesome new wheels, and we will be here for you when you need us.